Hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. This is Business Incorporated. I am Boostin Amafaye. We're live to you from Channel's global headquarters here in Nigeria. Let's get the show started. Analysts at Vetiva Capital Management revises upwards to $557 million the full year 2015 revenue estimate of the Lagos and London stock exchanges listed oil producer Seplat Petroleum. Asian stocks hold near the day's low as relapse in oil prices and fresh drop in Chinese stocks makes sentiment more fragile. Plus, Transparency International reports that 40 out of 46 countries in sub-Saharan Africa suffer from corruption, with Nigeria's position on the index unchanged. Now, these are the details for you. Analysts at Lagos-based Vetiva Capital Management has revised upwards to $557 million the full year 2015 revenue estimate of the oil producer Seplat Petroleum, listed in Lagos and the London stock exchanges. In a statement released late Tuesday, Seplat Petroleum was reported to have met its working interest production at 43,372 barrels of energy daily in 2015 against management's previous guidance of between 32,000 and 36,000. The indigenous oil and gas company was expected to report an earnings before interest, tax and amortization figure of $220 million and a net profit of $86 million, slightly higher than the 2014's figure of $84 million. The Vetiva report further states that Seplat's dividend per share is forecast at 0.03 cents, while the company's net debt was at $537 million in the past financial year. And one of the world's largest value company, Apple Incorporated, forecasts its first revenue drop in 13 years and reported the slowest ever increase in iPhone shipments as a critical Chinese market showed signs of weakening, suggesting the technology company's period of exponential growth may be coming to an end. The slowdown comes as Wall Street analysts worry the company does not have another blockbuster product to replace the iPhone. Apple Inc. does not report watch sales, but it does not appear to have the markings of being a hit on the same level as the iPhone a year after its launch. Apple Inc. says on Tuesday it sold 74.8 million iPhones in its first quarter ended December 26, 2015, and that was the first full quarter of sales of the iPhone 6s and 6s Plus. The 0.4% growth in shipments was the lowest since the product was launched in 2007. Let's get to the markets now. Mainland Chinese shares were lower today on a second day of hefty losses despite a strong performance on Wall Street and European markets on Tuesday. The Shanghai Composite down by 1.3% to 2,704.76, adding to Tuesday's rout of more than 6%. Most other markets in the region saw a slight recovery from the previous day's losses. Hong Kong's Hang Seng picked up the U.S. sentiments and rose 1% to 19,048. Japanese Nikkei 225 rose by 2.25%, closing at 17,163 after shedding 2.4% on Tuesday. In South Korea, the benchmark Kospi index closed 1.3% higher today at 1,896.14 points. As we speak, the European markets are in the red. The FTSE markets, the MIP in Spain, the Italian market, down by 1.77, the deepest across the region. The German market is now in the red as well, 0.75%, tracking the FTSE 100, the London Stock Exchange Broad Index or benchmark index, 0.45%. The Spanish market, the Italian market, and the Stock 600 down almost 1%. A very active trading day in Europe. So let's get a sense of some stories buzzing around the world and around the European markets today. Coming via telephone from the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, DWTV financial correspondent there for Channels Television, Javier Agueda. Javier, good afternoon to you. We thank you very much for finding time to be here.
Good afternoon, Bosun. Good to hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, we're getting this via a telephone. Let's get this conversation up and running. Today is the U.S. Fed decision, a major item on the agenda for the markets and investors. Do you think this is important to European investors and traders?
Well, it is definitely very important. Anything that the U.S. Federal Reserve has to say will be closely monitored here in Frankfurt as well, because these days we are seeing a very sensitive situation in most of the world's markets, and we do know that the Federal Reserve, by increasing the interest rates in the U.S., has partly contributed to a little bit of the trouble that some of the emerging economies are seeing right now. So we do not expect any major action by the Fed, at least not at this point. But people will be here how the Fed is reading the current developments. We know that the U.S. Federal Reserve would like to increase the interest rate a little bit more, but that is very unlikely to happen as long as the markets are in such a tumbling situation where we see the major losses at the beginning of this year and where we see that there is a very high dependence of the oil prices. So what investors really want to hear is how they are reading the current situation and how they are interpreting it. So that's why they will be buying and hearing very close to what Janet Yellen has to say.
Yes, there are a lot of central bankers reporting doing rate decision this week. South Africa, Russia, Nigeria yesterday. But let's step that a little bit aside. Let's go through some of the headlines from mainland Europe, where you are, Avi, and the rest of your colleagues. The French consumer confidence data. The Italians came out with their data as well. The Iranian president in Rome, and it's also in France. Now, talk to us about some of these stories, as well as the automakers in your jurisdiction chewing Toyota's #1 global sales position unchanged for 2015 last quarter.
That's right. There's a lot to digest right there. Well, we could begin by the good news, which is the consumer confidence data for France and for other countries here in Europe and in the Eurozone that are definitely above expectations. Now, this is possibly a direct consequence of the fact that we are seeing those lower oil prices, and that obviously means that there are many goods that can be bought at lower prices. So that, of course, will always foster consumption, even though, of course, we have to take into consideration that the general market and the general conditions of the economy in Europe are still not ideal. This also means a problem for the European Central Bank that, as we know, is trying to get inflation to rise here in the Eurozone. So we have to put that into the right context. But in all, of course, it's a good development for consumers. As for the Iranian president, that is also a very important topic, mostly in Italy and France. Of course, not that much here in Germany, since Germany is not part of the agenda. But that is a highly political importance, and of course it's always important to remember that they are not only here to purchase goods and services from Europe to foster their industries, but also to sell their own products, and especially their oil. So that will definitely have consequences for the development of the economic relationship between Iran and Europe. And as for Toyota, well, that was highly foreseeable. We know that Volkswagen had at a certain point been the #1 car maker in the world, but we also know that the impact of the scandal is going to have consequences in the overall sales numbers as well. So that is not a big surprise, and investors are definitely happy for Toyota, since that is a company that, of course, is a heavyweight for many of the international markets.
Yes, Javier, I had an apple sometime last week. It was still very sweet. I'm sure you had an apple in the last couple of days as well. But Apple Incorporated is reporting not very sweet numbers. Talk to us through the earnings season, starting with Apple, and give us some heads up. Companies within your market space reporting their 2015 numbers right now.
Well, as for the advancement of the report season, we are seeing fairly positive results. Actually, many feared that things would look a lot worse, since we not only had the fears over the economic growth in China, but also how the low oil prices might affect some of the industries. We know that oil companies especially are suffering, and that is bad for the overall state of most of the sectors in different countries. As for Apple, well, that shows us once again that you can't have growth forever. You can't have a sustained, impressive growth forever, and that is what we're seeing here. The numbers for Apple are actually not that bad, but of course they do have to work on the dependency of the iPhone as its main product. We know that more than 60% of their revenue comes from the iPhone sales, but the iPhone cannot be a such a special product forever, since the competition, of course, is not sleeping. So we'll have to see how Apple manages to introduce new product lines to counter somehow that dependency on that specific product. And the week ahead, well, we will see many numbers from many big companies, not only here in Europe, but also in the United States. Some of the biggest players, not only Apple, but also Microsoft, for example. Here in Germany, we will have the results of Deutsche Bank, which, as we know, are going to be very bad. That's due to happen next Thursday, so markets are eyeing that as well.
Okay, keep us in the loop, Javier, and the rest of your colleagues, our team together, Channels Television and DWTV at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Do have a great Wednesday, and keep an apple on your table at all times. Javier Aguedas from Frankfurt Stock Exchange. When we come back after the break, Nigeria's ranking remains unchanged on the Global Corruption Perception Index, number 136. How is the rest of the continent doing? We'll come back with that after the break. Stick around. Don't go anywhere.